My name is Peter Englert. I serve at Browncroft Community Church. I work as an adult ministries director, and I oversee and lead small groups, just our discipleship, so kind of helping people understand and apply their faith to their everyday life. So spiritual formation, prayer, Bible reading, that's all there. And then like I said, I live in Rochester, New York. I'm married to my wife, Robin, who is a mental health counselor. I have a daughter, Haley, and then I have another daughter that's on the way at the end of the month. So we are expecting.
Oh, congratulations. That's really interesting. And that's really interesting what your wife does too, actually. So what was it kind of like before you started working at church, and what were you kind of doing before then?
Connor, that's a great question. So to kind of sum up my lifetime in like 2 minutes, I realized at about 13, I wanted to be a pastor. Some would say I felt like God called me to be a pastor. And then I went to college at the University of Valley Forge, which is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I went there, I got my degree. I spent a semester in seminary, and then I got hired back to work there as an admissions counselor. So I had thought I was going to stick in higher ed. I loved what I did. And then I met my wife, and we were dating long distance. She's been from the Rochester area her whole life. I grew up in Binghamton, New York. So I love upstate New York. And through a series of events, I moved up to Rochester. And, you know, at one point, I just didn't feel like higher ed was it for me. And God opened a door at Browncroft. And I thought I was going to have to give up that dream, so to speak, of pastoring, but God opened that door. And so it was really cool.
Yeah, we kind of talked about and having that calling with God when Jason came and spoke. So is this something that that you believe is genuine? You know, is this something that there is some sort of calling that every single person has?
Man, that's a great question. Before I go further, because you mentioned Jason Romano, I just want to show the cup. He came and spoke at Browncroft. He talked about the perfect father based on his book in forgiveness. So love you, Jason. You know, so in the Bible, it talks about being called and being called into the family of God. So we're God's sons and daughters. And there's certain aspects of like family values. So I think about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. Those are callings for us. And that's something that if that's not working in our lives and we're not becoming who Jesus created us to be, then that's really going to mess up our career and calling, so to speak. I believe that God is still speaking, that God is still working. I believe that God calls people, and you know what? I believe that God calls people to be engineers. And so I guess I think where we have to be careful is we can't push the career and kind of the vocation before our character and our heart change. Because if you have the character and heart change, you'll be open to hearing from God and being led by Him. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, until that piece of our life is taken care of, it really doesn't matter, because you could be the most successful person, but be the most unhappy, ungrateful, because you didn't work on those areas of your life.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, actually. I think one thing I kind of think is if when it comes to career choices and doing a job, if you don't enjoy it, it becomes a job. You know, it becomes something that you do as work. But if you enjoy it, it becomes something that you do, a hobby, but you also make a living from it. And that's something that a lot of people don't do. I was talking to a YouTuber the other day on here, and we were talking about why people get into YouTube, or why people start wanting to be a footballer or a soccer player. And it's we were talking about wrong reasons. There's right reasons, things to make you happy, things that you enjoy doing. But then there's things that, you want to do it for the money or the fame. So, yeah, I really agree with what you just said there. Yeah.
I think we put too much pressure on careers. And we've said that you have one career that will make you happy and content. You know what? I think part of even giving up the dream of becoming a pastor was God's way of saying, like, you could have a fulfilling life and never get paid for doing what you love to do. And I think that that's important because, I think about when I was your age, Connor. I wanted to become a basketball player, and by the time I was your age, I was figuring out that I was only going to be 5'5", and I'm really slow. And we've never met in person. This is actually our first time meeting, but I put so much pressure on the career, and our job is only a sliver. I mean, it's very, very important. And I did my master's thesis on vocation and calling. And I think my concern is you can have a fulfilling life living and doing maybe a desk job and never getting a promotion, but there could be so much else to your life. And I just think we have to be careful. And, I think when people talk about too, if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I love this job. I'm working, so I'm joking right now. My friend Adam encouraged me to get this new camera that I'm using. I love creating content. I don't love editing videos or anything like that. And here I am, like 10 minutes before this interview, trying to figure out how to get this to go through. That's work. And so you're going to have to work, but it's complicated, but it's not. And, I look at Paul in the Bible, who wrote the majority of the New Testament, and he worked as someone that made tents. And I think that if we're just a little bit more open, God has a way of kind of helping us find contentment no matter what our job is.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think we've kind of covered that you work in a church in America. What would you kind of say are differences with churches in America compared to churches globally?
I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of experiences with churches globally. Where I want to start with like the good news of American churches, because there's a lot of bad news right now. We're recording this podcast the week that the Capitol building was stormed by supporters that disagreed with the election. What I love about the American church, and what I love is also its weaknesses. There's very much this entrepreneurial spirit of just people believe that we can, moved by God in healthy ways, that we can make a difference. And, there's thousands of stories of churches making a difference in their community that'll never get on CNN or Fox News. And so, I think about this recently in Rochester, our mayor called us as churches to adopt schools. And we adopted like a whole ton of schools, not just Browncroft, but other churches. And to see the body of Christ be mobilized, it was beautiful. It was a picture of how I believe that God calls us to live. The downside, I do think that there's consumerism. I also think, I'm part of a tradition, Protestantism, I grew up Assemblies of God, which is Pentecostal. And when you say the word Protestantism, there's this idea of protest. And I don't think we've recapitulated what does it mean to be an individual, but also be in a community. And I think around the world, just this is my opinion and feeling, I feel like when you talk about small groups, when you talk about community, when you talk about being accountable to each other, there's other parts of the world that do that better. And I think as we found this week, when you try to mix America, individualism, and Christianity together, it just doesn't work well.
No. Yeah. So, so my mum was born into kind of a Protestant family. However, when I was born, I was christened as a Roman Catholic. So by definition, really, they are two different kind of groups. They they believe in the same things, kind of, but there are differences and similarities between the both. Since obviously 16 years have gone by since being christened, my opinions and things of God, of religion, have changed. I think that comes through age, through maturity, through experience. So at one point in my life, there was some different hardships and things that go wrong in families that happen. And I was a firm believer that there was nothing. Religion was fake. God wasn't real. And I thought, well, if he was, I wouldn't be in this horrible situation. Or, I kind of shut the ideas down. And then I said to my mum, I said randomly, after not going to church for years, I said to my mum, I said, can we just go to Sunday service? Just because I just want to go back. I just want to experience it one more time. And we went. And there's this warm feeling, when you go into a church. You don't. It's strange to some people who haven't been to church or don't know what church is like. It's you go in and there's just this atmosphere that's very warm. It just feels. I don't know, like it's a bit weird to say, but it's a bit like a hug, when you walk in. And that was a couple of years ago. And now I study philosophy at college. And that has opened my eyes. It's a subject called religion, ethics, and philosophy. It's a very interesting thing to do. And we've covered lots of different things. We've covered philosophers' points against, points for. And a very good philosopher said, maybe the Bible isn't written as literal stories. Maybe everything in the Bible isn't, an exact say of what happened, but maybe it's more suggestions of metaphors. So maybe it's instead of a storybook, it's a guidance book. It's something that you can go to and read for help, for guidance, for support. And that's something that's been sticking with me for months. So I think the question that kind of comes off the back of that is, what would you say as a believer in God to somebody who, like me, say 4 or 5 years ago, who was a non-believer of God? What would you kind of say to them kind of people?
Man, you pack some punches there. I want to go in two different directions. First of all, I have my master's in theology, and so I kind of want to give I'd say the scientific answer to that, because there's a way that we study the scripture that's very, very important. So when I study a passage, whether that's to preach, whether that's on my own, I ask myself 3 questions. So the first question is, what did this passage mean to the original people reading it? So you'll hear me say the Bible's written for us, not to us. So there was a specific audience at a specific time that's not America or Rochester or Great Britain or Australia or Africa in 2021. No, it's Jews that lived in Palestine, it's Rome. So if you miss that question, you miss, you're making some huge jumps. And the second question that I ask is, what does this passage mean that's timeless? What does it always mean? So I'm not the first person to read the Bible. You're not the first person to read the Bible and interpret it. There's Catherine of Siena, there's Martin Luther, there's Athanasius, there's Augustine, there's Desmond Tutu. And as you begin to think through all these figures, how did they interact with Scripture? How did they arrive at some of their ideas? And that leads to the third question, which is this: what does this passage mean for us today? And so I think what we've done with the Bible is we've read the Bible skipping the first two questions, landing at the third question, which when we do that, we do this with other books. You do it, with Homer's Odyssey. There's other historical books. They had different rules. They had different ideas. They had different principles. Even Plato, we read that differently because it wasn't written to us in the 21st century, but it is for us. So that's kind of the scientific side. And the pastoral side is this: I never have the edge on certainty. And when you read the Bible, it requires a level of humility. And I think I learn the most about the Bible. I learn a lot from commentaries and from scholars, but I learn a lot from people who are actually new to faith or even skeptics or de-churched, because they pick up on questions that I just take for granted. And so I guess as you pursue the Bible, I think what we've done is we've tried to make it this 21st century book. And in essence, you miss the message because you forget that there were real people that read this and it changed the world.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really interesting point, and I don't think you're the only person with that kind of opinion. So, and that's quite good to know for anybody who's watching. And I think kind of also is us talking today. We're not saying, we're not in our views. You're different. Your views might be slightly different to mine, but we're not saying that anybody is correct or anybody isn't correct, or there is one determined answer. It's simply something that a person feels comfortable in. So you feel comfortable in talking about what you've just said, and I feel comfortable in talking about what I've said, and there are opinions and views. So we're not saying that we're both correct or we're both not correct. So I think that's kind of important, because unfortunately we do live in a kind of world where what we say has to be correct, what we say has to be politically correct, and what we have to, but it's okay to be wrong sometimes. So I think that's a big thing that I'm going to say now is if somebody doesn't agree with what either one of us has to say, that's okay. But what I do like is other people's opinions. So I get a lot of messages on Snapchat, on Instagram, on Twitter about people's opinions to my videos, to different things I've said in chats. Mostly really good, positive comments, but I do get some questions, which I like answering. So if anybody has got any opinions or anything that they want to kind of say, they are more than welcome to, and opinions are more than welcome to me.
Yeah, and the one thing I just say to that is, and I love conversation, and the Bible points to Jesus. So the Old Testament, from Genesis to Malachi, it points directly to Jesus. And the New Testament, the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it describes Jesus's life and the difference. And the rest of the New Testament looks back at what Jesus did. And so I would just say, if you're a skeptic, if you're angry, if you're upset with church, if you're looking at the politics of what happened in America, I would implore you to go to Jesus, to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I think when you rediscover Jesus, things begin to change. And when we talk about the Bible, we tend to want to debate important issues, but in debating those important issues, we miss out on the larger message of faith in there. So I just encourage you, wherever you are spiritually, it's the search and the pursuit of Jesus that really, it's where our questions are. It's who we're really looking for. So I just point you there.
Thank you for that. One thing you've just mentioned, and it was mentioned before, the really unfortunate and tragic events that happened earlier this week at the Capitol building in America. For whatever reason, for the people who don't know, it was some supporters who didn't agree with the electoral vote in America. They didn't agree with it, and they went to the main Capitol building in America, which is in the UK. I'd say that's probably like our House of Commons, where we pass our laws and things like that. So I think that's kind of the building over in America. Unfortunately, there were a couple of deaths, several injuries, and there was a fair amount of people that were arrested. But apart from that, it has resolved. That single event has been resolved, but the opinions, the fight, the views haven't changed. Which leads me on to the next part of discussion. Do you think churches in America have changed in 2021, but mainly 2020, with all the political and racial and global issues that happened?
Well, Connor, can I start here? What do you think about what happened in America? I don't always get to talk to someone from Great Britain. I'd be interested to hear your opinion.
Yeah, thanks for that. I found out about on Twitter. I actually didn't believe it at first, because that's unfortunately the world we live in. You have to second guess what you read on social media. But I read it, and at that time there was am I right in saying there were people in the building at the time? I think some senators were in there, and was the vice president in there too?
I believe so. Yep.
So there were people in the building at the time, and then I just went onto YouTube, and it was being live streamed, but then it just cut out. So I went back onto Twitter, and there was just these 15-second clips of people that were inside, people that were already inside, not people that had broken in. And there was screaming. You could hear distant crying, really distressing. And then obviously some pictures came out of the outside of the building. And then the next update was that guns had been drawn. And then there was another update to say a woman had been shot, but CPR was being administered. And then it just kind of progressed. And then, a couple of hours later, there was several deaths, lots of people arrested. Now, my opinions on that were that it's a very unfortunate, putting politics aside, putting different people's opinions, different people's views aside. Everybody there was a human being, and it was not a nice thing to see. I saw a few jokes on social media saying, "Oh, well, it makes the UK look better because of Brexit or because of what our Prime Minister's doing at the moment." Which, for that split second, it's nice to have that second of humour, but then it comes straight back to, this is actually something that's happened. For me, and for a lot of people, America is supposed to represent democracy, and it's supposed to represent freedom, not just with this event, but with other events that have happened in 2020. It was really proven that, this democracy was failing, this freedom was failing. And, I think my opinion of the reason why it's all happened is coming through, but I'm not sure whether it's right for me to say it, but I think it's important for other people to make their own opinions of it and to look at other factors. It doesn't always come down to single people's opinions, but it might come from a larger, more powerful person. And that's all I'm really going to say on that. But I think that was kind of the opinions and feelings, not only by myself, but a lot of my friends, a lot of my family, and certainly probably a lot of people around the world.
Yeah. As a pastor, where, I first heard the news, one of the teammates I serve with here at Browncroft sent me an email, and she had just mentioned, she said, "Can you just pray for the Capitol?" And, kind of like you, and I've asked a couple people, how did you find out? And, very much like you, I didn't believe it. Or I didn't, we have a ton of news stories. And then the more I read, the more I saw. Honestly, I'm grieved as a nation. I'm grieved as a pastor. I love Browncroft because there are people from all political walks that come to this church, and the gospel is changing their hearts. And that's part of how I pastor. That's part of what gets me up in the morning. And, as followers of Jesus, we do hard things. I've used this example a couple times, but I think it's so important. Jesus's followers, Jesus's disciples, the 12 people that he invested the most time in. One was a tax collector for Rome who was Jewish and was occupying Jews. They had taken them captive. And there was another zealot, Simon the Zealot, in Matthew. Simon wanted to overthrow the government. If you want to talk about a powerful message to where we are right now, and I'm not even going to compare who's Simon the Zealot right now and who's Matthew, because there's a time, but somehow Jesus in his group of disciples, I'm fairly certain that they probably had some fighting, debates and heated, but somehow through that gospel message, they stuck together. And so as I think about the way forward, we talk about politics being a discipleship issue. And that sounds, it sounds like you could tweet that, but it comes down to the individual's hearts being changed. Can I love someone, and can I spend time with someone that's outside of the party or the viewpoints? And, for the Christian church, and especially for the American church, this is a pivotal moment. Are we going to speak the truth in love? And, just make it very clear, the violence that happened on Wednesday, it's sinful. It was wrong. It should have never happened. That's not the values of Christianity. That's not the values of America. The value of America is peaceful protest. That was terrorism. And I think that that's important to be said. And, on top of that, as we move forward, and this was said in 2016 too, when President Trump was elected, I think we have to be careful, because we said, well, we don't really know America. We don't really know each other. And this is a key time, and we're in the midst of a pandemic. So that means, who you Zoom with, who you work with, someday who might be at your dinner table. There's a quote about the gospel which says this: it brings natural born enemies together. And what I'm concerned with is we have this opportunity to live out the gospel in radical ways if we take it. And, I think the national story about the church is its allegiance to politics. And I think that that's an issue. But in the local church that I serve and the other churches around here, like I said, I see partnerships with our mayor. I see partnerships with town supervisors. I see caring for schools. So there's a lot of work to be done. And the question that keeps me up at night as a pastor is, if Browncroft disappeared from Rochester, would anyone notice? And I think that that's the question that every church in America and in Great Britain, the UK, and Australia, and Africa, and Russia needs to ask. Are we, if everything else fails, is the church living out the message of the gospel? And, that's kind of what gets me up in the morning.
That was a very good answer to that. One thing I saw on my social media afterwards was a big question from that awful event was why the police didn't act quick, or didn't act how they have done in other situations. I'm not a police officer. I don't live in America, so my answer won't be a full 100% answer. But what kind of came from it was, why do police officers act in a certain way to other circumstances? And it was mainly a race question. A lot of people said if it was a room, of black people, or if it was black people or people of ethnic minority coming in, they would have acted different. Now, I don't really agree with assuming, assuming and saying the police officers would have acted like that, because it's not happened and nobody knows, but people are just going off things that have happened previously in history and kind of putting it. So do you think there is a big separation in America, more so now than ever, between white Americans and people of other ethnicities?
That's a great question. We want simple solutions and we want simple answers. I can tell you this, there's a small group in Browncroft where there's a Black individual with a police officer. There are police officers that come to this church. They serve really well, and we do have not just Blacks and African Americans. We have Asians and Indians, and we have, I wouldn't say that we're this hugely diverse church, but the question is really, really important. I host a podcast called Why God Why. We of course had the issue of, we had some protests about the death of Daniel Prude, and it is difficult conversations. And one of the things that I've thought about a lot, there's a theologian by the name of Esau McCaulley. He wrote the book Reading While Black, and whether you're a Christian or not, I would highly recommend that book for right now and in the future. And he writes about, we talked about my 3 questions about reading the Bible, and he writes about reading the Bible from the perspective of a Black person. And one thing that he said, we were in a conference together, and he said, what would have happened if we would have had these conversations 10, 20 years ago? So my prayer and my hope is we have the difficult conversations. And from the people I know, those conversations are happening. You won't see that on the news. I'm praying and hoping that what happened Wednesday is a wake-up call. And I think no one likes to be stereotyped, and we need to speak the truth. No one likes to be put in a broad brush. So I think it's extremely important that we remember individuals, that we remember people have stories and experiences. And one of my favorite aspects about the Bible is Jesus, there's 37 personal encounters. So Jesus talking in conversation to different people. Not one of them is the same. So Jesus, in the way that he lived his life, in the way he models for us, is when I meet an individual, I treat them as someone valuable and created in the image of God, that their value comes from God creating them. They're a person that I believe that Jesus has died on the cross for and has resurrected from the dead. So I hope that we're changing. I see a hope in your generation, but it's tough. These are tough conversations. These are complicated. There are police officers that probably should not be police officers, but there are many police officers that are followers of Jesus, attempting to live their faith out there. There are, a number of people that are Democrat and Republican that love Jesus, that want to do what's best. And, we were talking about vocation and calling. And, part of the gospel is we don't run from this, and we don't, it's as simple as Jesus had called us to pray for our enemies and to love those who persecute us, and I want to be careful of that word persecute, but, to love our enemies. And, as you read the message of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, it's radical. It's radical to where we are right now. I don't know if I answered your question, but I've been thinking about that a lot too.
Yeah. So I think to kind of round off that point, if anybody does want to kind of go into that question of race or police officers, I've got a brilliant book here. It's a brilliant book. It's also a series on YouTube. I advise every single person to go and watch this. there's an episode in this series with police officers. Even though, so if anybody's watching from the UK, don't think that because these are American police officers, or this is an American man, or this is an American kind of series, don't think that it doesn't apply to the UK or to anywhere else in the world, because it does. This is the brilliant book. It's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and it's by Emmanuel Ocho. Emmanuel has a series on YouTube called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and he does talk with lots of people, but he does talk with a group of police officers. So I advise anybody and everybody to go and to watch that episode and to watch the rest of his series.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Emmanuel is modeling. He's modeling what hope looks like. He's modeling the uncomfortable conversations. It's funny you brought up Emmanuel. I know his brother Sam, who just had a book out, and what I'm thankful for is, I look back at the Why God Why podcast. So number one, I'd say this: when it comes to race issues, it's get informed, and it's never been easier. You can go on YouTube and search uncomfortable conversations. Like you said, there's a great one with police officers. There's also great ones with actors. I mean, I just saw the Matthew McConaughey one. There's a great one. I'm going to forget. I don't follow these sports, but PK Subban, who is a hockey player who's Black, and he's married or dating Lindsey Vonn. For Why God Why, we had an interview with a woman named Heidi Baguma, who's married to David from Sudan. And I think number one, inform yourself. Number two, I think serving your community. I think that getting out of your comfort zone, and I understand the pandemic is hard, but I think there's ways that you can serve. And the third thing is, it is getting into community. It's getting to know your neighbors. It's understanding the issues. It's taking time to have conversations. But I love what you said about Emmanuel Ocho. I have that book on my reading list. But you're right, and there's people that aren't going to change their views, and there's people that they will continue to see the world through their frame and lens. And I pray that God works on their hearts to, I'm not even saying that you need to change your political party or, but I am saying this: if you don't have the compassion and empathy and sympathy, whichever word resonates with you the most, to see someone else's experience. And again, the Christian message is this: every person is created in God's image. We live in a fallen, broken world of sin, but we are reconciled by Jesus Christ. Therefore, what Jesus has done for us, we reconcile with each other. So again, I think you need to inform yourself. I think you need to serve, but I also think you need to get to know people. So, yeah.
Most definitely. Two points to come from that is Sam, Emmanuel's brother, is lined up to be on a chat with Connor. He's very kindly said he would talk to me, so I'm very excited and looking forward to that.
By the way, if you haven't read his book, I get to read a pre-copy of that. It's phenomenal. And we also had him on Why God Why. Man, for being in the UK, like, we must all follow the same people on Twitter. So there you go.
That's kind of how I work it. So I have one person on. I think it all started with Emmanuel. I think it all kind of started there. I I followed him because I found his videos, and then it went to Jason. Then Jason went to you, and from Jason it also went to Sam as well. And actually from Jason it also went to there's a man called Jonathan. He's a TED talker. He seems very interesting. So he's lined up too. So I've got a couple of people coming up, which is really, really exciting for me, and I'm extremely grateful for every single person who's given me a little bit of their time. I'm sure you kind of that feeling with your podcast, Why God Why. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but what's it kind of about, and what do you discuss?
It's a great question. Why God Why is our mission is to respond to questions that people don't feel comfortable asking in church. Currently, we're in a grief series. We're talking about, because 2020 is a year of grief. And, so just Wednesday, I did my latest interview, with a mental health therapist. Her name's Joyce. So for those of you that don't think you struggle with grief, number one, you know someone that is, but number two, I think we're all grieving in some sort of way this last year. But we had Sam. He actually talked about his book before it was written, just about identity, about who God created you to be. We talked to Jason about forgiveness. So there's a number of questions, and we started our latest episode at the time of this recording. It just posted yesterday. It was with my mentor and friend Mike Keys. It was about why is grief good. So there's a ton of different questions in there, and it's a weekly podcast. It's at whygodwhypodcast.com, WGW podcast if you search that hashtag, or search us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. We're actually on LinkedIn now, but yeah, that's kind of the gist. And I'm really looking forward to these series on grief. I think, my co-host John Amayo, we shared on the show his mom passed away from COVID, and little did we know, how the heaviness. But I'm wondering, at least for America, if part of our problem is we've pushed ourselves to be producers, commodities, and in some ways, if this is God's moment for us to lament and grieve and slow down. And I just have been coming back to that. And, we talk about the Bible. Jesus, is a great place to start, but the Psalms, you see the gamut of, think about this, a holy book. The Bible is supposed to be the holy book for Christianity. It allows the writers to openly be angry and upset with God. That's pretty powerful. So, in this podcast, we talk about issues like that. Pretty much if you Google, question with why God why, we've hit a ton of them. I shouldn't say that. We're almost at 100 episodes, but yeah, that's what it's all about.
Wow, that's incredible. Firstly, I'd like to, I'm sorry for your co-host loss. It's a very unfortunate situation for him, and I do feel sorry for him. Secondly, grief is a huge thing. People believe, sometimes grief isn't real, or grief comes out in different ways, and they are correct. Grief does come out in different ways. Grief isn't always about, a human loss. It could just be about a loss or a feeling of anything. Earlier this year, this academic year, in about May, when I was due to sit my GCSE exams, which is the exam that you sit at the end of school in England. I was ready to do them. and then COVID cut them all off. It was the government's decision to stop exams, which I agree with. It's to keep everybody safe, but it also meant that we didn't do our exams. We've been preparing it for 5 years of our life, going to school every single day for 5 years, to lead to nothing. So not having exams, that loss of exams, is also a form of grief. So so grief is a big thing, and it's very important for people to be more self-aware and to understand grief. I think it's also good to get an early look onto what these different feelings are, because when it happens to you, because it will do, unfortunately, that's the way life works. It will happen. But when it does, you'll be able to self-reflect and think, I know about this. I listened to a podcast. I heard grief on, Why God Why. It was brilliant. They were talking about grief, and people will be able to, kind of self-reflect. So I think that's really important, and that's something that you're doing, which is absolutely brilliant. So thank you for guys.
Yeah, and just listening to you, that's kind of the hope of grief. What we tend to do is, and maybe this is an American, maybe it's better in the UK. A theme that's come up is Americans, and especially in Rochester, like someone will lose their arm or break their arm and lose their job, and then they'll say to me, hey, like, my life's not as bad as someone else. And that completely dismisses the grieving process. And, I even listen to you, for you to be able to articulate, I wanted to take my tests, but I'm grieving. Because, grief is kind of this silent killer. And I think, we don't even know sometimes when we're grieving. We might binge Netflix. We could actually be putting in 70 to 80 hours of work. And unless you do that work, you're not going to be available to the people you love and care for the most. And it's just been fascinating hearing people share their stories of grief. It's different levels. But I also just kind of think that, a lot of what's happening in the world is because we haven't encountered grief well.
Yeah, definitely. So this time has flown by incredibly. We've had such a brilliant conversation, and I do really respect and appreciate your time. So if we kind of say a final point, what is your aspirations, goals? What are you expecting in this next coming year?
Man, that's a loaded question. It's hard. I'm getting to like middle age, and I don't know. Like I said, I got this new camera, and I can see a little bit of my gray hairs and stuff like that. I have dreams and aspirations of writing a book. At this point, my friend Adam McGuffey, who runs the Joy Ethic, who I work with for Why God Why, he's telling me to vlog. I love making content. But my dreams this year, I feel like cherishing far more time with my daughter, Haley. She painted that great picture in back, and someone's probably going to mention that I didn't do the Zoom right so that way it looks right on screen. But anyways, I'm looking forward to the birth of, my second daughter. And, my prayer for Browncroft, the church that I serve, is, that this church would be an example in Rochester, New York, of what it means to love our community. I grew up in Binghamton, New York, and one of the most significant influences on my life was the senior pastor, Ron Piedmont. And he used to say this, that we're about across the street and around the world. And, so, I think my goals for this year, like many of you, I'd love for COVID to go away. I'm hoping that the vaccines and things work. I'm hoping that, we can kind of get back to some level of normalcy. But I'm also hoping that what we've learned in this season would push us forward. And I think about this. I haven't even asked you how you started this podcast and got this idea, but I'm fairly certain it was easier to do in COVID, in a pandemic, than it would have been at any other time. And so it's been difficult, and we need to grieve and lament. But there's also been individuals like yourself that have really made the most of it. So I think our goal, I'm praying for healing in this country. I'm praying for reconciliation. I'm praying for the church to call out sin where sin needs to be needed, and forgive, and to live out the gospel in creative and brand new ways. So that was everything and nothing all at the same time, but I'll let you decide that.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's a really good, interesting thing. And if people don't use the word pray, then they use the word hope. But I'm sure every single person feels the same way and wants the same outcome towards the end of this year. Hopefully with certain things sooner than the end of the year. But hopefully with all fingers crossed, or prayers, or hopes, or dreams, or thoughts, or whichever way people like to do it, hopefully there will be some light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully that tunnel is quite short. So yeah, thank you.
Well, Connor, thanks for having me on, and keep up the great work.
You too. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your time. I think everybody should go across and listen to Why God Why podcast. I've listened to a few episodes, very interesting. And I do advise everybody to go and listen to these podcasts, because I'm sure if you've enjoyed this, then you will enjoy that. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Connor.